Okay, everybody, it is an exciting day if you are a Slack shareholder, or it might be disappointing because people thought Slack was going to be this independent company that grew forever and maybe became worth hundreds of millions of dollars. But it seems the company, with the headwinds of Microsoft Teams constantly blowing them back and the inability to grow really fast, they seem to have put themselves in a position to be forced to be acquired by a larger company. This news broke in the Wall Street Journal last Wednesday, November 25th, and it's expected to be announced, as I said, tomorrow, December 1st, depending on when you're listening to this, according to CNBC's David Faber. And so it's supposed to be a half-cash, half-stock deal, and it will price Slack at a premium. The market cap, as of today's close, about $24 billion, and Salesforce was $223 billion. So this would be worth approximately 10% of Salesforce's enterprise value. And the deal is supposed to be in the $17 to $25 billion range. I've heard a bunch of different numbers. The stock has obviously popped massively. Prior to this, Salesforce's largest acquisition was Tableau, which they bought for close to $16 billion back in 2019. And you have to ask yourself, why? Why are they doing this? Well, in many cases, a big company will make a big bet like this because they can, because they have a market cap, because they have access to capital, and because keeping it out of the hands of competitors is also important. What if Microsoft, what if Google, Facebook, or another company, IBM, were to own Slack? This could be problematic for Salesforce because Slack is so ingrained in next generation startups and mid-sized companies. It is how companies run. It's really the operating system of remote teams. When you are on a remote team, you live and breathe inside of Slack. Now, since the pandemic happened, you would think that Slack would have surged, but it didn't for some reason. And I think it's Microsoft Teams. I've only had one company out of maybe 200 active companies we've invested in, 150 maybe are active out of the 200 plus we've invested in. I've only had one team actually invite me to a Microsoft Teams call. And it was kind of Zoom-like, and I understand they have a Slack-like features, but I don't see a lot of Microsoft Teams in the small startup space, but we do see absolutely Slack is the standard. And why didn't Slack become big like something like Zoom did during this break? I have no idea. The product seems to be a bit stagnant and super confusing if you're not part of this culture. So I think the product always had this headwind of being a little too complicated for people to understand, and the product team, although they made a really great world-class product, it seemed like they were going very slow. Some things were kludgy and maybe a little janky on the margins, like inviting other teams to your team Slack. So you want to have your accountant or your law firm, or maybe two companies are working on a joint project together and they want to be in the same Slack room. It was super confusing. And I've actually had these discussions with Stuart from Slack publicly on Twitter, and he's very responsive to it. I also said just a couple of weeks ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, I said to him, why isn't there like a universal URL? So I could be people.slack.com/Jason, just like I have a Twitter URL, twitter.com/Jason. He's like, oh, we're working on that. That's definitely in the works. That universal identifier where I had a profile and everybody would be able to follow that profile, and that profile would follow me from organization to organization would be really cool. Because if I were to leave a job, I'd still have my Slack profile. I could still have followers. I could still have conversations with people outside of my work. That would have been a great vision, but it feels like Slack maybe couldn't scale to that next level. Now, they were doing, if you look at, the amount of revenue, it's pretty amazing that, they were at $200 million a quarter in revenue. If you look at that run rate of, $800 million or so in revenue, in other words, in a year, they do $800 million. Well, a $24 billion market cap, like we're talking about here, would be 30 times revenue. Think about that, right? 3 times 8 is 24. You add a couple zeros, boom. So 30 times revenue. And so if you look at Salesforce, their run rate is $20 billion in revenue. That's a lot of revenue, right? More than 20 times what Slack has. And they're giving them basically 10% of the organization's value. So that makes you wonder, why are they doing this? Because currently Salesforce is valued at 11 times their revenue, right? So their market cap's $223 billion. They've got $20 billion. So that's 11x. Then you again look at Slack, $800 million, 24x. There's got to be a theory here, a thesis.